Welcome to Cat Chat. I'm your host, Sherman, and I'm joined by my amazing co-hosts, Donick, Derek, Tanya, and Levon. Hey, we'll speak with Keith Washington and his attorney today.
This is my daughter, Kayla. She's a 19-year-old student and my sunshine.
This is my mom. Her name is Stacy. I guess I would call her my rock. When I was a kid, I would call him my best friend. We did everything together. He played baseball, so we went to his game at night. We would run around the house, and I would be on his back, and we'd be chasing my mom, or I'd be in my mom's arms, and he'd be chasing us. He was my best friend, pretty much.
You just never know how, in an instant, your entire life changes.
Two Marlowe furniture delivery men were shot. One of them died while dropping off bed rails. It happened in January 2007 at the Accokeek home of Prince George's County Police Corporal Keith Washington. He was Deputy Director of Homeland Security. Upstairs, 3 to 5 shots were fired. 22-year-old Brandon Clark died. His partner and cousin, Robert White, was critically wounded, but later testified against Washington at his trial, saying an argument resulted in an unprovoked shooting. Washington was convicted in 2008 of involuntary manslaughter, 2 counts of first-degree assault and use of a handgun. He was sentenced to and is serving a 45-year prison sentence.
My dad shouldn't be in prison. He protected his family.
This call is from
Keith Washington,
an inmate at the Maryland Correctional Facility.
I look down the hallway, and White is sticking his head out of Caleb's bedroom. And when I see him, I say, "Hey, what are you doing in there? Come out of there." Clark is like, he said something, and before I knew it, the guy hit me in the back of the head. And then White punched me from the front. I'm thinking right now, this is how people get killed in their own home. White's on one side, Clark's on the other side. He kicked my arm so hard, like I was ducked down, like in a squatting position, covering up my head, that it broke my watch and knocked my watch off my wrist. Now, it's life or death. And I know that my wife is there, my 6-year-old daughter is there. When I pull my gun, I'm squatted down. They're on top of me, 12 inches from me.
As I'm coming down the hallway, I'm looking up. I get here, I go up to come, I think, okay, they're beating him, these 2 guys. He's in the middle, they're on either side of him. And I think, oh my God, I need to help him. And I start to go up, and then I think, no, I need to get her out of here. So I step back, turn, and as I'm coming back this way, that's when I hear the shots. And then I just go back through here, grab her, and then grab the phone, and then go out the garage door. They were very large, 2 very large men, and Keith was not a large guy. If they had gotten his weapon, I think they would have killed him. They may have killed him anyway. They were way bigger than he was. He was unable to fight back. He was unable to run. There was just no way for him to get away from them. If he had not had his gun on him that night, it's very possible that he could have been killed.
Washington's account placed them in very close proximity, including that one was on each side of him, beating him as he was crouched down. Mr. White's account placed them at some significant distance from Mr. Washington when he started shooting at them. The ballistics laboratory testing demonstrated that there was some gunpowder residue that was deposited on the entrance wound. And in fact, you really cannot posit that kind of gunpowder residue from a distant gunshot.
Keith's description of where the shots were fired matches where the shell casings were located. None of Robert White's story lines up with the evidence. He has Keith in the master bedroom doorway firing the shots. There are no shell casings found there. When they did the ballistics check and they did the gun residue test, and they found at the tip of the barrel was a distance of like 3 to 12 inches, which is more consistent with them being right up on Keith when that shot was fired.
He had swelling underneath his eyes and swelling in the lips. And from my experience, yes, he was hit more than once.
Did he look like he had been in a fight?
Yes.
Once he was being assaulted, then he had every right to use lethal force, particularly in his home, since his wife and daughter were downstairs, in order to defend himself. Washington being in jail is just a travesty.
Keith should not be sitting in jail for 40 some odd years of his life. I've handled a number of homicide investigations where individuals who committed murders have not received half that time. I also believe that there were some issues with regards to the way the state's attorney's office conducted themselves. And the fact that this did have some political undertones for their office as well. Mr. Wright, had definitely had political aspirations as well during that particular point in time.
This issue's been around for a long time. PG County has had a lot of reporting done on it over the years. And I can see even back then where this could have been a issue that that's a politically minded prosecutor might want to jump on.
I think it became pretty clear that the prosecutor had an axe to grind. The prosecutor was looking to make some perhaps political hay to further their own career.
He's been in prison for 12 years.
I guess in the beginning I tried to shield her from all of this craziness. So tried not to talk about it a lot and just tried to let her have a childhood, really.
When I was younger, I was in Girl Scouts, so they'd be like daddy-daughter dances, and I wouldn't go because there's no one to take me. He didn't see me at graduation. He didn't, see me at prom.
He is probably one of the most kind-hearted people. He was a police officer so that he could make a difference. Kayla said to me, one night, not long after he was sentenced, we told the truth and Dad still didn't come home. What do we do now? What do you say to that? That kind of sums it up for me. What do we do now? And I think I said something like, we keep fighting until he comes home. And so here we are, still fighting.
Jonathan hasn't joined us yet with his client, but we are definitely going to wait for them, to come on. But the gist of the conversation of what they wanted to discuss with us was about to bring awareness to Keith Washington and his incident, but also to discuss some of the concerns with accountability.
I was invited to join you, I guess. My name's Keith Washington. I've served 17 years as a Prince George County police officer. I served over 20 years in the United States Army, right? And been a citizen of this county for 36 years, right? Mm-hmm. And I was invited on, my lawyer called me. He said, hey, man, would you like to go on here tonight and inform the people of a few issues vis-a-vis county government, county executive's office and the state attorney's office. It is shabbily run, and criminal conduct has been committed by several state's attorneys in the last 3 administrations. And we have the evidence, the documents, we have statements, we've even traced money that changed hands. Oh.
And but before we get into that, because I definitely have some questions that I want to ask you, Keith, and again, thank you so much for joining us. We played your video, Making of an Exoneree, and it was a very difficult story to watch, seeing, from then to now and hearing the story of how things went down. And as you say, you served both as a police officer and a U.S. Army veteran.
Yes.
How do those experiences shape your sense of duty and responsibility to others?
Well, first of all, let me just give you the backstory about my life. I was homeless as a 15-year-old.
Hmm.
My family broke up. I wasn't homeless, my father, ran off, and my mother and my three sisters and I was the man of the house at 13. I had a job since I was 13. Uh, my sisters went to live with my relatives, grandmother, aunts, other cousins, and my mother had a nervous breakdown. I had to commit her. Had to commit her to sane asylum, and I was a teenager in the 10th, ninth. I was going from ninth grade going to the 10th grade, and so I slept in an abandoned car. Her and I did for a while until she had a nervous breakdown, and we stayed at the shelter off and on. But anyway, I was just going to school making D's and F's. I was in the 10th grade. I had a job at Pizza Hut and throwing for the post in the morning. So that was my job since I was, 13 years old. And so anyway, in the 10th grade, when all this tragedy happened, I was still going to school, but I was just going to school in the morning to get the free breakfast. I'd get out of the car, go get free breakfast. And around my 12th grade year, like I said, I had D's and F's on my transcript. I knew I wasn't graduating, but I didn't know what I was going to do next. And a neighbor, a guy who lived on the dead end street, saw me as a kid sleeping in the car every night. So he called the principal and said, "Hey, there's one of your students out here in the car." They came out there and got me. And they said, "What have you been doing?" I said, "Hey, well, this is what I've been, kind of embarrassed or whatever, little dirty kid." And so they said, "Hey, go in here." They let me come to school every morning, shower or whatever, brought me clothes or whatever. I felt really embarrassed because I didn't want anybody to know. But about a month before graduation, I saw two friends of mine walking, um, Charles Shelvin and Dexter Hill. I said, "Hey, man, where y'all going?" I was sleeping in that car, and they would just walk by the car. It's a dead end road. And they said, "Man, we're going to join the Army." I jumped up. I said, "Wait a minute, I'm going with you." Just like that. Just like that. Never heard of the Army day in my life. And went with them. And 15 minutes later, talking to a recruiter, signed up. He, took us downtown to take the ASVAB test. And he said, "Where you live? I'm coming to pick you up Monday morning." Um, and I was 5'2" and 106 pounds in the 12th grade. That's how malnourished I was. And when I took the physical for the Army Induction Center, the doctor told the recruiter that I was too small. You had to be 5'5" and 125 pounds. That was the minimum height and the minimum weight, 5'5" and 125 pounds. So the recruiter came back in the room. He told me, he said, so the doctor told me that I didn't really, that was the story of my life. Didn't know what I was going to do next. And the recruiter came in and took the physical and scratched out 5'2", 106, and he put in 5'6", 126, and gave it back to the doctor and said, "That's his height and weight right now."
Hmm.
And so I went on through with the basic training. They sent me to Korea after basic training. And when I got to Korea as an 18-year-old, keep in mind I didn't have a high school diploma. He asked me, "Did I have a high school diploma?" I jumped ahead. I told him, "Yeah." And he asked me where I lived. I gave him my grandmother's address about 50 miles away. And he said, "We'll be out there to get you Saturday morning." So I hitchhiked out to my grandmother's house at Friday night. And she woke up my grandfather. She said, "Henry, get in here, that boy at the door. It's 3 in the morning." And I came in. I said, "Big Mama, I'm going in the Army in the morning." She didn't know what to say. My grandfather like, "What, boy?" I said, "Yeah, I'm going in the Army in the morning. They're going to be here around 5 o'clock. So we sit there on the couch all night, me and my two grandparents, my grandmother, and my grandfather, and she cried. And the recruiter came in a van rather, with about 10 other people in it. And I jumped in there and hugged me and kissed me. That was all off to build my life, right? Whatever it was going to be. Finished basic training, got sent to Korea as an 18-year-old. When I got to Korea, one of the first sergeants, they pulled me aside. It was like 7 or 8 first sergeants in there, and there's about 30 of us getting off the plane. And they said, "Washington, stand over here." I said, "Over there." He said, "Listen, you get back on the plane, you're going back to America." So I didn't know why. He said, "I'm looking at your GT score, and I'm sending you to be a linguist." So they sent me back to Presidio, California to learn Hanguk Korean. So I spent 9 months in California, learned Korean fluently as an 18-year-old private, back to Korea to interpret for MI, Military Intelligence Unit. And that was my start in the military for 2 years. And came back from that, and I tell you a ton of experiences in that. But anyway, came back from that and got stationed in Fort Polk, Louisiana. And I don't know if you remember, Ronald Reagan had fired all the air traffic controllers.
Traffic controllers, yeah.
So in 1981, the Army put out a message that if you want to re-enlist, you could re-enlist for air traffic controllers since there was none in the country. And they pay you a $20,000 bonus, which was a godsend. Never seen that, heard or seen that much money in my life. Now I'm 20 years old, but I had a Alabama redneck racist first sergeant at Fort Polk, and he said, Washington, if you want to re-enlist, you're going to re-enlist for the infantry and not for air traffic controller, which I didn't know that I could buck the system, which you couldn't back then. But so obviously any black soldier that wanted that $20,000 bonus, they wouldn't allow it in the Army I was in at Fort Polk in Louisiana. So I got out, went to college, got my GED, went to college, joined ROTC, graduated, went back in the Army, retired as a colonel. So from a homeless kid to retiring as a colonel in the Army is a testament of what my mother and my grandmothers put into me, right?
Yes.
Now, as far as this story,
Yeah, and that's a very compelling story, and I thank you for sharing that. Can you walk us through the events of January 24th, 2007? From your perspective, what went through your mind during that incident?
Well, I ordered some bed rails for my wife. It's on the website. Matter of fact, Georgetown did an investigation. Well, you guys have seen the video. So
yes, you played the video.
Okay, the website and the video. I ordered bed rails for my wife. People showed up. 2 people showed up. I assumed they were Marlowe furniture delivery people, and I let them in the house, not knowing that one of them was a registered sex offender and he was high on cocaine when I let him in the house. Not knowing that neither one of them worked for Marlowe's, according to Marlowe's, when we ended up in a civil case, and that they had been running a scam with a guy in the warehouse who was a warehouse manager, where he would get his friends to deliver furniture who didn't work for the company because he didn't have to pay him as much, and he kept the rest of the money. And then they were doing burglaries of people's houses. They'd get in people's houses to see what was going on, and then drop the stuff off, leave, and they've already been inside and cased the house. They had done 2 burglaries before they got to my house, right? I was the 3rd homeowner whose house they were cased and burglarized. The other 2 had been burglarized. So the state's attorneys knew that. Glenn Ivey knew that when they prosecuted me, that they didn't work for Marlowe's and that they had burglarized several houses before mine. When I let them in my house, unbeknownst to all this stuff, one guy tried to distract me upstairs in my bedroom. We put up the bed rails. I said, where's your boy? Where's your friend? He said, don't worry, I got him, shorty. Well, I know how my house sounds, so I can hear the creaking in another room on the floor. The floor creaks in my daughter's bedroom. And when I said, where's your boy? I looked down the hallway and he stuck his head out. Now, my 6-year-old daughter's, that's her bedroom. My 6-year-old baby, my youngest child. And I said, what are you doing in there? Come out of there. And he stuck his head out. I said, come out of there, come out of there. And as he's coming out, I'm walking toward him, and the other guy's walking behind me. And when I got toward him, like I said, I did not know that he was on cocaine, according to the toxicology report done by the state's attorney's office.
Right.
That they had his toxicology report done by Dr. Muhammad Khan, who tested positive for cocaine the night of the shooting in my home.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
and how did the revelation of Robert White's criminal background and dubious employment status of a delivery man influence your defense, particularly, because I know that came up. How did they actually uncover that?
Well, the state's attorney's investigators uncovered it. Lieutenant Charlie Walls and about 5 other investigators uncovered it and gave it to Glenn Ivey and said, hey, we're your investigators, but this is the deal with this guy, that he has done several burglaries before he got to Mr. Washington's house, and he has been convicted of those two other sexual assaults and burglaries he did down in South Carolina. So a total of 4 burglaries he had done, 2 down in South Carolina and 1 in Virginia and 1 in I believe DC. And so I was number 3. But my point is the other 2 victims he had assaulted in their home. And for those crimes, he spent 10 years in prison. That they hid that, Ivey hid that from the jury, from the public, and from the court, from the judge.
And how do you feel? How did that make you feel when you found out that Robert White's criminal history and the irregularities with the delivery were either downplayed or withheld? You know, for
well,
the case?
it's just blatant corruption. That's the only way to put it about it. When people openly lie as politicians in order to deceive the public, create a false narrative in order to get votes and act like they're actually doing something, right? Then this has been an 18-year cover-up, right? This happened in January 2024. It is now January 07. This is now January 2025. That's 18 years ago. An 18-year cover-up. Yeah. Every state's attorney, Ivey, has at least 25 different law enforcement experts, law professors, former state's attorneys, detectives on the Prince George's County Police Department who investigated the Georgetown Law School have all said the same thing, that this case was falsified, period, exclamation point, and it was falsified, as we believe, for a $400 million shakedown. Now, because 7 days after the shooting was January 24th, 07. On January 31st, a lawyer named Michael Winkleman filed a $400 million lawsuit against me in Prince George's County for, for shooting a guy unnecessarily, as they say, or illegally. They could only go through with that lawsuit if I was convicted. Unknown to everybody that nobody hired this guy. He was not representing Robert White or the dead guy, Marilyn Clark, a son, Brandon, who died, that he had forged their names on a lawsuit. And that Glenn Ivey was telling the Office of Law to settle the lawsuit with this guy, Winkleman. Michael Winkleman is his name.
Wow.
So we have that. That's a crime, ladies and gentlemen. So the only way they could go through the lawsuit is that I had to be convicted. So they withheld all this evidence, lied about it, and everything else. And so people don't know the massive amount of corruption in there. Now, Angela Alsobrooks was aware of it too when she took office in 2010 after Ivey, because about 12 different people briefed her, including members of her staff, that the evidence was falsified. And she did nothing about it for 8 years but cover it up and lie about it to the media and to the public, right? Unknown to us that Jolene Ivey got Angela Alsobrooks a $70,000 raise through legislation. And I think it was House bill, you can look it up, you can Google it, the House bill that Jolene Ivey sponsored that got Angela Alsobrooks a raise to $220,000 a year salary, something like that, from 150 to 220. And everybody believes that was hush money for her to cover up now, Angela Alsobrooks does not even live in Jolene Ivey's district. But Jolene Ivey, as a state delegate, then goes to Annapolis and passes one piece of legislation for one person to get a $70,000 raise. So when you add that up over a 7-8 year period, that's over $500,000 extra in her pocket. See, I speak plainly and clearly, and if I'm lying, you can sue me for libel. Their website names names and dates and people, right? And what they did.
That's something that we say.
So please sue me. I would love that.
That's my favorite line.
Please sue me.
If I'm lying, sue me.
Then I can get you in a deposition and get you to answer some real questions that have been here.
Exactly.
Can we please give the website while we're waiting?
It's One Innocent Man, all one word, ONE, oneinnocentman.org. And I encourage you to send it out to everyone in your social media group or email list, because Ms. Braveboy has it now. Georgetown sent her a 39-page letter of their investigation and outlines it, everything from A to Z. It reads like a movie. Who did what, when, where, and for what motivation, and really how much money they received.
Now, the document is on the website.
That 39-page document is Ms. Braveboy has it. It's confidential between the lawyers, but we're going to release it. Should Ms. Braveboy see the law allows Ms. Braveboy to overturn my case immediately through what's called the conviction integrity law that she so freely promotes in her office, that she established a conviction integrity unit in her office. But she's been holding on to this case for couple of years now, and not enacting the law, which only allows Marilyn Mosby used it regularly in Baltimore to free innocent people.
Yeah,
Overturn
yeah,
innocent
she
people.
definitely touts it as part of her campaign for kind of executive
I
right
would suggest
now.
you asked her what adults has she used it on? What adult cases has she used it on?
I was going to ask her, but she refused to do the interview with us. But so unfortunately, you know, the world may never know the answer to that question. I definitely had some concerns about the public integrity unit, and also
I think
unit
it's a
that you spoke
smokescreen.
of.
That's my true belief, and I'll just say that because you know these politicians, they just lie. That's all they do. And it was really crazy is black people who fought and died and marched for these people to go to law school and get these jobs. They could care less. They got it, and they act like they got there by themselves, and they act like they don't owe obligation to the people and to the community and to us in general, right? And to our ancestors who sacrificed their lives for them to be who they are today. And so that's my take on it. Everybody has a different opinion, but like I said, you know, at my age now, and what my family and I have been through, I feel no compunction to hold my tongue or just go along and get along with people who I know are you know, not doing what they're supposed to do.
So with that in mind, what are your thoughts on the allegations of a cover up by the state's attorney office under Glenn Ivey? Do you believe that it was a deliberate effort to secure a conviction at any cost? You know,
absolutely.
How did that work out for you?
Oh, it's absolutely deliberate. Let me tell you how it's deliberate. That the lawyers who prosecuted me, Joseph Wright and William Mumau, they called my attorney a couple of weeks ago, right? They're no longer state's attorneys. They called him and asked him to drop the case because we're filing paperwork next week. They said, don't open that back up because they don't want to go to jail or be disbarred. Because I'm going to the Attorney Grievance Commission, and Ms. Braveboy has the documents that show where they forged the names of Robert White and Brandon and Marilyn Clark as plaintiffs in that $400 million lawsuit. Mr. White and Ms. Clark says they never signed any such document, and they said that under oath. It's in the transcript. When they were asked about it, they said, well, we're not suing anybody. We don't know anything about a lawsuit.
How did your legal team uncover the key pieces of evidence that weren't initially presented? Because certainly that provided challenges for you.
I hired a guy named Vincent Cohen. I'm gonna tell you, this is gonna blow your mind. I hired a guy named Vincent Cohen who called my house during the time of this case was being investigated. He told me that he was a former U.S. attorney, a defense attorney, that he knew I was innocent, and to hire him and to fire my current attorney named Michael Worthy, which I didn't know any better. So I said, okay.
You said Michael Worthy was your attorney?
Michael Worthy was my first attorney, my original attorney, a couple of days after the shooting, a former state's attorney. He said he knew what to do, so I hired him, you know, just like that. Cohen calls and says, hey, I've got more experience. I've done murder cases before, blah, blah, blah. Hire me. This is crazy. You're innocent. Unknown to me that Vincent Cohen and Glenn Ivey used to work together in the Justice Department. And the other friend, Boss, was a godfather of Ivey's children. That, ladies and gentlemen, is corruption to the highest level, where you're using an attorney as a plant to give to me, right?
So let me ask
Cohen is his name.
So, okay, so there wasn't a disclosure of the conflict of interest.
No, there was not.
And so this is documented in as part of the investigation?
Yes, Ms. Braveboy knows about it. Ms. Alsobrooks knew about it. Mr. Ivey knew about it because he's the one who sent the guy to me, right? It was his friend, his buddy at the Justice Department, Vincent Cohen. My wife has called Vincent Cohen over 200 times when I was in prison, and he never returned one of her calls after I was convicted.
Okay.
Not one.
Now, is Jonathan coming on?
I don't know. I'm texting him.
He said that he was, but I know that we are short on time.
But did you just call him? You called him,
and we're
right?
going to, get ready to play the Calvin interview.
Right?
Yes, ma'am. I called him, and I don't know, because he called me.
He actually just joined us.
Okay.
Oh, there he is.
There he is.
So I need to get him set up.
And so he can speak to any issues you have. I can speak to him, but he can speak to him also.
Yeah. Hey, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you for being on. I want to ask, how did the discovery process or lack thereof affect the ability of Mr. Washington to defend himself? To have a proper case?
To do what himself? So the way that the criminal justice process works is typically, and it's just, this is how it works. The police will investigate a crime, and they will turn over their investigation to the state's attorney's office to prosecute the crime. Everybody's seen Law and Order, and during Law and Order, they have this introduction to police investigate the crime and investigate, and the lawyers prosecute the crime. In Keefe's case, when the investigation took off, one of the things that was done, and it's a known fact by almost all parties who've been associated with this, is that the prosecutors removed the lead investigator in the case after the lead investigator started developing facts that were contrary to a narrative that had already been adopted by the state's attorney's office. So the investigation was going in one way, and that way would not prove what the things that had already been put out in the media and the things that had already been adopted by the prosecutor's office was. And so when they removed him from the case, when there were facts to the contrary, the justification that we have recently gotten is because that prosecutor was removed because they were quote unquote covering for my client, Mr. Washington. And so the first act of prosecutorial misconduct and is essentially interfering with an appropriate investigation. And by interfering, I mean you can make an investigation come out the way that you want it to come out if you interfere with the investigators who are doing it. If you remove investigators, if you tell investigators to only bring me this or only bring me that. There's a book that I have that's right here on my desk. It's called Prosecutorial Misconduct, and it's by Joseph F. Lawless. And in here are numerous examples of the type of prosecutorial misconduct that educate lawyers like myself, because if you don't know, you just don't know. And so once you start realizing what has been done and what's deemed inappropriate, you can have an eye for it. In Keefe's case, the first issue was the investigation not being left to mature naturally and having members of the state's attorney's office under Glenn Ivey interfere with the investigation. Then, after certain facts came out during a civil trial, instead of people righting the wrong at that time, they bit down hard on it and continued this cover-up. And this is not Jonathan Newton's opinion. This is something that is known by the people who conducted some of the investigation at Georgetown, and this is something that is known by other people who have done independent investigations as well.
Opened this up.
Not at this, well, of the civil case. So here's what happened. When Keith Washington was criminally prosecuted, within 7 days after the shooting took place, there was a $400 million lawsuit filed on behalf of the decedent and behalf of the surviving, I don't call him a surviving victim anymore. I call him a surviving state's witness. And what happened now, just that very fact alone right there, okay? What civil lawyer would ever file a $400 million lawsuit 7 days after the shooting before any of the facts have been developed in the case? Now, another important fact to know is that it's known and it's been admitted on the record that this particular lawyer who did this forged the signature of one of the participants in the lawsuit to a retainer agreement and said that he represented that individual. And then it continued to move forward. So now the civil lawsuit is going. The criminal prosecution is going. They were able to secure a conviction in the criminal prosecution, and the civil lawsuit was taking place over several years. And what happened was Mr. Washington got his own independent attorney to defend him, and the county had an attorney to defend them. The civil attorney who did the defense for Mr. Washington during a deposition, and a deposition is a sworn interview with the surviving witness, that particular attorney got that individual to acknowledge that he perjured himself during grand jury testimony, perjured himself during actual jury trial testimony, and the only people that he had talked to prior to Mr. Washington being indicted, he didn't talk to the police because he lawyered up, but he somehow or another skipped all of that process and ended up in front of a grand jury testifying to facts that he would later refute even himself. But the only people that he talked to prior to his grand jury testimony were prosecutors led by Glenn Ivey and his team. And so they were then able to secure an indictment against Mr. Washington and could proceed to trial. Now, they then proceed to trial. They get the conviction. The civil matter is still pending. And after the civil matter comes to an abrupt conclusion where essentially they found that this is what's really crazy. The standard to convict someone in our courts is beyond a reasonable doubt. It almost naturally follows that if you achieve beyond a reasonable doubt, that you automatically should achieve by the preponderance of evidence that certain things are done. That happened in the OJ case. He was actually acquitted in the beyond the reasonable doubt standard, but found guilty on the civil standard. In Keith's case, he was convicted in the criminal case, dismissed, but found not liable in the civil case.
It was all perjured and falsified evidence. And then we had them state on the record in the transcript that the case against Keith Washington was without any legal or factual merit. And that Judge Sean Wallace concluded the same thing after they heard Mr. White's testimony, his confession, that he was coached to lie by Glenn Ivey, William Mumau, and Joseph Wright.
Can I ask a question?
Before you do, Tanya, I definitely want to ask something about it because go ahead. I'll ask after you. Go ahead.
Okay, so and I'm sorry because I had to take a call real quick. The civil case was concluded before the criminal case?
After.
Oh, is that
after? Year and a half after.
Okay.
I was in prison, brought back from prison for the civil trial.
No, after.
And Mr. Newton, can you explain what you believe were the key failures in the discovery process during Mr. Washington's trial? Because there had to be some critical evidence withheld, as we discussed earlier with Mr. Washington. Can you go over that?
Well, everybody knows this case to be a case of Marlowe furniture delivery men, and that's these Marlowe furniture delivery men came to Keith Washington's house, and this shooting occurred. Well, the first thing that's not really truthful is that they were not employed by Marlowe Furnitures, and the surviving witness was never employed by Marlowe Furniture. The way that became known was later on. But what was presented to a jury was that these were Marlowe furniture delivery men. And in fact, what happened was the owner of the truck had a contract with Marlowe Furniture, and he picked these people up and essentially put them on the truck. Marlowe Furniture then subsequently settled a lawsuit with Mr. Washington because those people were not supposed to be in his house. And one of the people that was in his house had a record that would have precluded him from working in that capacity.
Mr.
And that
White
record was extensive for
at the time he had 27
what was the
criminal
exact
arrests,
charge against Mr.
11
Robert
criminal
White?
convictions. He was convicted for
Wow.
sex offense. He was convicted for armed robbery. He was convicted for 2 burglaries. He had been convicted for uh, peeping Tom. He had been convicted for drug possession and something else. And he had been to trial 16 other times that evidently he beat, or the charges were dropped or whatever along the way.
And his criminal past was not presented in the.
Mr. Ivey had that, Mr. Moomout, and the 2 prosecutors had that, and they made a motion to judge Michael Whalen, who's
Whalen,
right, who's an old time redneck.
The judge,
in this county.
the judge denied
Yeah.
the presentation of his criminal record. And that became an appealable issue, right? That should have reversed the entirety of Keith's conviction. However, the appeals court held that it was not properly preserved, and therefore they could not hear that issue. I believe the sitting U.S. attorney for the state of Maryland is the one who argued that appeal.
Jury's out on his,
on behalf of Mr. Washington. Am I right?
Can I ask one more question? Okay, so that evidence was withheld, but what about the evidence that they did not work for Marlowe's Furniture, and that Marlowe Furniture
Marlowe's Furniture, through Lieutenant Walls, the lead investigator, had given Walls a statement the very next day that these
but it wasn't entered into evidence during your criminal case.
In my trial, they lied about it, said that they were employees. They let him get on the witness stand in the grand jury to say he was a Marlowe employee. They let him get on the witness stand in the criminal trial to say he was a Marlowe employee. I was fraudulently indicted in the grand jury by the perjured testimony that they used. Then I was convicted in the criminal trial by the perjured testimony they used. That Marlowe's had told the state's attorney's office one day after the shooting, we don't know these guys and we don't know how they got on our truck. They then did their own investigation and fired Mr. Robinson, who was putting these people on his truck. Like I said, they were doing burglaries, casing houses.
Right.
So they suppressed this.
Yes, they did.
And Marlowe's Furniture settled with you.
Yes, ma'am.
Washington.
Yes, ma'am.
And that wasn't enough to do a reversal, Jonathan?
So we believe we have enough to, this is almost, it's crazy that we're here, because there's enough information that would cause any reasonable lawyer who's looking at this to say that they should have no faith in the integrity of the conviction of Keith Washington. When Georgetown did their assessment, that was turned over to the state's attorney's office. They, in October of 2022, a 39-page document essentially summarizing all of this was sent to the current sitting state's attorney, and had been sitting for, that document had been sitting left up until the time when I was hired in the case. And essentially, it has been sitting since October 2022. October of 2024, we sat down and we began trying to finish this off to see if we could get the state's attorney's office to, and we're awaiting the conclusion of their investigation this week. I'm told that there'll be an update to that, and so we're cautiously optimistic that that they will do the right thing. Certainly, there's enough there. I'll tell you another salient point that I think really adds a lot of context to this as far as perjury is concerned. Everybody knows the process in Maryland. You can go down to a district court commissioners, most of them are open 24 hours a day, and you can fill out an application for a statement of charges for people. It's done all the time, like swear out a statement, and people get arrested behind those. On two separate occasions, while Mr. Washington was in jail, his wife took the perjured testimony through the transcripts and the statement that was done in the deposition and presented that to a district commissioner. And the district commissioner found that probable cause existed, that perjury was committed. Then under one administration, it was the Alsobrooks administration, Joseph Wright himself had called the floor after they found probable cause was there that perjury had been committed. It was passed to the state's attorney's office to prosecute this. On the day of that trial, Joseph Wright it's purported that Joseph Wright contacted the assistant state's attorney on the floor in the well and said,
and what does that mean?
Null pros that
Let
case.
me help.
That case was null pros at that time. Now, the second time that
if I may,
that means that they're
while I was
choosing,
in
they're
prison,
exercising their
my wife
prosecutorial
took the
discretion
evidence
not
that
to
we had
move
that had been
forward with the
gathered,
case.
right, through my second attorney, Daniel Karp and others, to the commissioner of all this perjured and false statements and everything, 81 perjured statements. The commissioner issued a warrant for Robert White, a criminal summons for his perjury in the grand jury, which is how I was falsely indicted and brought it to trial. He said, this is all perjured testimony. Mr. Washington should be free based on the evidence I'm looking at, an independent commissioner. He forwarded those documents to the state's attorney's office. They were now going to prosecute Robert White for perjury. This in 2010. I would have been released from prison in 2010, December 2010. Joseph Wright, the guy who prosecuted me, right, who took the bribe, I'm going to say it out again. He took a bribe to prosecute me, authored by Glenn Ivey. He then found out that this other state's attorney was prosecuting his star witness, Robert White, for perjury against me that sent me to prison. He asked her as a favor not to prosecute Robert White into what's called null prosit, meaning drop the charges, which she did the day of the trial for him to plead guilty or innocent. I would have been released from prison that day or shortly thereafter because his testimony that indicted me was fraudulent. He's the only witness the state had. She dropped it. She then talked to my wife and Michael Worthy after the hearing, and asked her, why'd you drop it? She said, well, Joe Wright called me at home. I don't know him. I know he's a colleague, but I just did him a favor. And then they told her the gravity of what she just did. She was very calcitrant. She said, I did not know, Miss Washington, that this is what that case was. I thought it was just a regular case. So he fooled his colleague to dropping the case. That is a crime. Conflicts of interest, obstruction of justice, malfeasance in office, right there, by him and by her for doing him a favor. You can't do favors in the law and dropping cases because somebody asked you for a favor, because it would have implicated Joseph Wright in suborning of perjury. Which is a crime also. Now,
and during your 13 years in prison, what kept you going?
The ability to get out, get back home, get my family. Listen, I'm a country boy. We've been through hardships all our life, right? As Black people, right? Some of us just ain't gonna give up. And I can say that, we grew up in I always wanted to help prison. Prison to me was the worst experience of my life.
Yeah, it had to be, especially going from law enforcement. Putting those individuals inside of,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people don't realize, the unmitigated violence in prison is wolves in their sheep. It's raw and uncut, and so you get the correctional officers are criminals. I'm gonna tell you like that. More drugs in prison than they're on the street. They bring them in every day. The gangs run the prison, and it's like I say, unmitigated violence 24/7. And so you find yourself caught up for anything, anytime, anywhere, because that's just the way it is.
And are they sanctioned by the correction officers, the fights
Absolutely.
as well?
Absolutely. Listen.
So, Jonathan, at this point, what is next for Mr. Washington's case?
In October of 2024, we sat down with the state's attorney's office and we started asking them to consider filing a motion to vacate the conviction. We believe that investigation, I'm told, we've met with them twice during the start, and then we got an update. And I was told about 2 weeks ago that this Friday we should expect something. And so we're waiting for that answer to come. We're hoping that the office itself finds that there's no faith in the conviction of Keith Washington. We're also preparing to move forward with a petition for post-conviction relief should we have to on our own, which is our own pleading and filing with the court should we have to. Mr. Washington is also considering his rights to seek criminal justice by contacting the certain law enforcement agencies of the federal nature to be able to seek justice in that way. Prior to this administration that's currently in the office, there was almost no way that anybody was going to do anything for him. Again, we're still optimistic that Ms. Braveboy will do the right thing on behalf of Keith. We were
certainly
told
election
that,
season,
we
so
would have
hopefully,
some
you
answers
know.
shortly
And
after
let me
the
ask you,
holidays. We
let's
have
say that
not
that does not happen.
gotten that
Can
answer
this
yet.
go?
We do.
And it sounds like the appeal courts
Yeah.
don't want to take it. So would this go up to? Could it go up to the governor?
Convictions aren't something. I mean, the governor can issue pardons and clemency. What Mr. Washington is looking for is a vacating of the conviction. You know, Mr. Washington participates with the Atlanta Braves during their training camp, but Mr. Washington cannot go on a high school or middle school baseball field to coach our kids. It's truly a shame what happened to him, and the people that are in office that have the ability, the power, and the obligation to do this simply have not acted up until this point. What we're going to do, and one person, Mr. Wright, I want to say hi to you. I hope you watch this. When I started advocating on behalf of Mr. Washington, he told me that I was crazy, and that they were going to stay stuck. You know, I didn't know what I was doing. I'm crazy. I'm going to go as far as the Lord allows me to go with Keith to be able to help him get justice for this. We believe in his case. We believe that that conviction should be vacated. And anyone who really is a person of integrity would agree with that. When Georgetown did what they did, the gentleman who writes the book on criminal procedures, his name is Byron Workin. Byron Workin actually met with Glenn Ivey and said, "Hey, you know, let's do the right thing here with this." Byron since passed away. He's known as Professor Byron Workin. He's since passed away, and nobody at the local level has taken any action to right this horrendous wrong. And we're just going to keep pressing. That's what we're doing now. We're getting ready to go on another radio. We're actually probably go on WPFW within the month here. We're starting an organization called the National Association Against Prosecutorial Misconduct, because I started in the police accountability space. What happens a lot of times is that prosecutors really aren't held accountable for this type of stuff. And, you know, all right, I appreciate that. Mr. Washington is, you know, when people see my clients, sometimes they, man, he's really, you know, he's excited. You know, man, I'm telling you, he's calm. You know, he's a very accomplished man too. The picture that was painted of him was that he was, you know, wild and out of control. That's an individual.
No, I was 5'2" and 106 pounds in high school.
At 18, okay. How tall are you now?
I'm 5'9" and 180. When I finished basic training after 12 weeks, after 12 weeks of eating solid food, meat and potatoes, and exercising every day in basic training, I grew 7 inches as an 18-year-old.
Oh, wow.
Oh, okay. Because I was getting ready to say, and I don't know if you remember me, Keith, but I remember sometimes we would be out there playing baseball with Jack's team.
Right.
And you would come out there with your suit on,
right?
Baseball, running around the bases with your dress shoes on. But I just want to one last question of Jonathan, because
short question.
Yeah, I know, because we still have Calvin's video. So the focus is vacating this conviction and not really a pardon, because and it sounds like with all the evidence that you have, it should be vacated. Is that correct?
So unquestionably, it should be vacated. And so the people who have the ability and the power to be able to file the motion, which we would join, can do that. And there should be justice delayed is justice denied. And, you know, I don't care if it's political season. No man should have to wait for justice, you know, because of a political season. We should be able to get that the moment that we show enough proof they get it. And I think that because
that's a part of the democratic process as well. So I definitely want to get you all some justice. And we appreciate and thank you all so much for coming on our show. We'd love to have you back, you know, to keep us abreast of how everything is going, and best wishes.
And we will definitely post the link on our page.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Yes.